Richard Westbrook had built an empire on the principle that nothing in life was free, and he wore his wealth like armor against a world that constantly demanded more from him. On that cold November morning, as he stepped out of his penthouse overlooking the city's glittering skyline, he had no idea that a dying child's crayon drawing would shatter every wall he'd spent 40 years constructing around his heart. The sleek black Mercedes waiting in his private garage represented everything he'd fought for: success, independence, and the freedom to say no to the endless parade of outstretched hands that seemed to follow wealth like shadows. But sometimes the universe has a way of breaking through even the most fortified defenses, and for Richard, that moment was just hours away. If you believe that even the hardest hearts can learn to feel again, and that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest power, please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring these touching stories to life. Richard had made his fortune in commercial real estate, transforming derelict properties into gleaming towers of glass and steel. He prided himself on seeing potential where others saw only decay, on making the hard decisions that softer men avoided. His business partners respected him. His competitors feared him. But no one, not even his own sister Margaret, could claim to truly know him. The loss of his parents in a car accident when he was 23 had taught him a brutal lesson about depending on others, about the futility of emotional investment in a world that could take everything away in a single moment. So he'd chosen a different path, one of calculated risks, measured returns, and carefully maintained distance from anything that might threaten his control. The morning started like any other. Richard's driver navigated through the city streets toward the financial district, where a crucial meeting awaited. But traffic had other plans, forcing them to take a detour through the older part of town, past neighborhoods Richard usually avoided. These were the streets of struggle, where crumbling schools stood next to overworked hospitals where families counted pennies and dreams often died young. As they passed St. Michael's Children's Hospital, Richard's assistant mentioned that the hospital's foundation had sent yet another donation request to his office. It was the 5th one this year. Richard's response was automatic, almost reflexive. No, he'd built his fortune by keeping business and sentiment separate, by understanding that every dollar given away was a dollar that couldn't work for him. Besides, he reasoned, these organizations had entire departments dedicated to fundraising. They didn't need him, but fate, it seemed, had been listening. The car pulled up to his office building, and Richard stepped out into the crisp autumn air, already mentally preparing for the negotiations ahead. It wasn't until 6 hours later, when he returned to the parking garage, that he noticed it. Someone had been to his car. His pristine, spotless Mercedes, detailed weekly at a cost that could feed a family for a month, was decorated with something that made his chest tighten with immediate anger. Crayon drawings covered the driver's side door, childish scribbles in bright primary colors that had no business being on a $50,000 paint job. Richard's first instinct was to call security, to demand the footage, to find whoever had dared to vandalize his property. But as he moved closer, ready to assess the damage and calculate the cost of repair, something made him pause. The drawing wasn't random graffiti or mindless destruction. It was a picture, crude but unmistakable in its intent. A stick-figure child lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by other stick figures with sad faces. Above the bed, someone had drawn a sun, bright yellow with rays extending outward like hope itself. And beside the sun, in shaky letters that suggested a hand weakened by illness or medication, were the words, "Please help us shine again." Richard stood frozen, his anger evaporating into something more uncomfortable, confusion mixed with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Taped to the car's door handle was a small envelope, already damp from the afternoon drizzle. Inside he found a letter written on lined paper torn from a school notebook. The handwriting was barely legible, each letter formed with obvious effort, but the message cut through him like a knife through silk. It read, "My name is Emma, I'm 8 years old. I have leukemia. The hospital needs money to help kids like me. My mom says you're a millionaire who works in the big building. I drew on your car because I wanted you to see us. We're here. We're real. And we need help. I'm sorry if I made you mad. I just didn't know how else to make you look." Something cracked inside Richard's chest, a hairline fracture in the foundation he'd built so carefully. He looked around the garage as if seeing it for the first time. The rows of expensive cars, the security cameras, the pristine concrete floors that separated this world from the one just blocks away where children drew on strangers' cars because they were desperate to be seen. His hands trembled slightly as he reread the letter, imagining the effort it must have taken for a sick child to walk to this garage, to gather the courage to approach his car, to put crayon to metal in a last-ditch attempt to reach someone who might help. Richard's next action surprised even himself. Instead of calling his detail service, he drove directly to St. Michael's Children's Hospital, the crayon drawing still visible on his door. The receptionist looked startled when he walked in, this sharply dressed businessman asking about a patient named Emma. There were protocols, privacy concerns, but Richard's determination was something new, raw and impossible to deny. Eventually, a nurse named Patricia led him to the oncology ward, explaining gently that Emma had been battling leukemia for 2 years. The treatments were expensive. Her single mother worked 2 jobs but couldn't keep up with the medical bills. The hospital did what it could, but funding was always tight, especially for experimental treatments that insurance refused to cover. Emma's room was at the end of a long hallway painted in cheerful colors that couldn't quite mask the underlying sadness of the place. Through the window, Richard could see a small figure in the bed, bald head resting on a pillow, surrounded by drawings taped to every available surface. The nurse knocked softly before opening the door, and Richard followed her inside, feeling more nervous than he had in any boardroom negotiation. Emma looked up with eyes that seemed too large for her thin face, eyes that held both the innocence of childhood and the wisdom of someone who'd stared down mortality before most kids learned to ride a bike. When Emma saw him, recognition flickered across her features. She knew who he was, or rather, she knew what his car looked like. Her first words weren't an apology but a question. "Did my drawing make you mad?" Richard found himself sitting in the chair beside her bed, the expensive fabric of his suit jacket brushing against the sterile hospital linens, and for the first time in decades he felt tears threaten behind his eyes. He told her no, he wasn't mad. He told her that her drawing had done something much more important. It had made him see. What happened next would change not just Emma's life, but Richard's entire understanding of what it meant to be truly wealthy. He spent the next hour listening to her talk about her treatment, her dreams of becoming an artist, her worry about her mother who never slept anymore. He met other children on the ward, each with their own story, their own battle, their own desperate hope for tomorrow. By the time he left the hospital that evening, Richard had made a decision that would have shocked his business partners. He didn't just write a check to cover Emma's treatment, though he did that immediately. He committed to funding an entire new wing of the hospital, dedicated to pediatric cancer research and treatment. More than that, he established a foundation that would ensure no child ever had to resort to drawing on a stranger's car to be seen. The crayon drawing on his Mercedes became something sacred to Richard. He had it professionally preserved and framed, hanging it in his office where deals worth millions were negotiated. It served as a reminder of the day a dying child taught him what his parents' death had somehow failed to imprint, that walls built to keep out pain also keep out everything that makes life worth living. Emma's condition improved with the new treatment options the hospital could now afford. She didn't just survive, she thrived, eventually holding her own art exhibition with Richard as her proudest patron. Years later, when people asked Richard about his transformation from ruthless businessman to philanthropist, he would take them to his office and show them the drawing. He'd tell them about the child who had the courage to reach out when no one else would, about the moment he realized that true wealth wasn't measured in zeros on a balance sheet, but in the lives you touch and the hope you kindle in others. He'd explain how Emma's simple act of vandalism had vandalized his carefully constructed philosophy, replacing his fortress of isolation with windows that let in light. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Your engagement helps these messages of hope reach more people who need them. The stick figure drawing of a child in a hospital bed reaching for a son had taught Richard Westbrook what decades of success never could, that sometimes the smallest hands hold the greatest power to change us, that vulnerability isn't weakness but the doorway to genuine connection, and that being seen by someone we've overlooked is the first step toward truly seeing ourselves. Emma hadn't just asked for help that day. She'd offered it in the only way an 8-year-old child could, by refusing to let him hide anymore. And in accepting her gift, Richard finally learned what it meant to be truly, abundantly rich.